May have some new Toyota people today.
Uh-oh. I should have got a comfortable chair.
You got time.
No, I'll be there. Once we start talking, it'll be fine. I hope you get more people from the hands-on agile.
Streaming. Okay, cool. Good. We don't have anybody on yet. So.
Where do you see the questions come up? Oh, you see them in the chat.
Yeah, I put the chat on the. I changed everything up. You'll see in a minute. So. Let me close my 35 browser windows to make sure. Memory back. Two people. That might just be me. All right.
I closed the wrong tab.
Wow, that's all right. Let me get some more. Ready?
Ready or not?
All right, here we go. Holy cow, that is messed up. Jeez, oh Pete, let me fix that.
Oops.
Wow. Sorry, everyone. You'll see me fixing a ton of things. Apparently, stuff got. See, this is what happens when you try and make changes last minute.
Shouldn't tinker.
Eric was trying to tell me not to do this, but I decided to anyways. So chat will be fun. Let's see how messed up chat is. Oh dear Lord. Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay. I'll get it eventually. Okay, we're set. I probably shouldn't clap in this room, right? It's not like we're outside.
Yeah, it's a little
we have
echoey.
we have a ton of people. So for those of you that are just tuning in, we have somebody new. So this is Eric. I've never. What's the appropriate pronunciation of your last name?
Give it a shot.
Is it Hannan?
Yes.
It is Hannan?
Spot
Okay.
on.
I didn't know if there was some accentuation.
Hanan,
yeah, like is there
Hananian
some.
in the end.
Yeah, no, it's just
Hannan.
It's just like it's spelled. Okay, cool. So I met Eric 3 years ago.
Probably 2.5, 3 years ago.
Eric applied for, was it a Scrum Master or Agile Coach position? One of those two. So Scrum Master or Agile Coach position. I'd never heard of the guy. He walks in and crushed the interview. And I was like... Yet I may have not opted to choose Eric when I should have.
Guess I didn't kill it that much.
He did. We've stayed in touch for years, pretty much ever since then.
Yep, absolutely.
And I've just, when I stepped away from my last company and started doing this gig, Eric's been good about just helping me along the way, and he chimes in pretty much every day and keeps me on task. He's almost like my personal Scrum Master. I'm glad he doesn't charge me Agile coaching rates because I'd be broke So thankfully that's not happening.
Oh, that bill's coming.
It's coming?
It's coming.
All right, so I just want to make sure. So this is our first road version outside of my house or Bob's house. So Chad, if you can just kind of let us know if sound's good, picture's good, everything's good. Want to make sure that everything's peachy and we can make adjustments as we go. If you were late, you missed me scrambling to fix some of the streaming controls because they got all jacked up. So hopefully everything's good on your end. If you're new, this was born out of a crazy idea that my wife had. Bob Galen and I, who have done a podcast for way too long, we're like 134 episodes. We've been speaking at conferences I've been doing it for probably 6 years. Bob's been doing it since conferences were created, it seems like. And we stopped doing regular talks where we come in with a topic and we talk at people for 60, 70, 90 minutes. We decided that we just want to help people with your questions because that's what we do on our podcast. So we just started saying, hey folks, what questions do you have? We pass out a set of 3x5 cards. They write their questions on it. One of us acts as the product owner and gets those in groups and clumps, and then we just go and knock them out. And my wife said, well, you should just do that on Twitch because I'm a little bit infatuated with Twitch.
Just a little.
Just a little. I'm even trying to build a business around it, but that's a whole nother thing for another day that we can talk about. So this is our opportunity to give back to the community that helped us, and hopefully any questions that are out there help people make their tomorrow better than today. So if you have questions, pop them over in the chat. If you're on desktop, it's most likely on the right side. If you're on your phone, it's probably below your video. We are here. Eric said, listen, Josh, I'm going to answer every question. You don't have to say a word.
Bring it. Bring it on.
So he didn't say that. I was hoping to make him nervous because this will be your first. Is this your first?
It's definitely my first Twitch.
Yeah. You've spoken at conferences, right?
I've spoken at one.
Okay, there you go. Okay, all right. So problem solved. So this is a piece of cake. Piece of cake. Well, it's good to see that Fire Sue is here, our original viewer. So thanks for coming back, Sue. Until folks have questions, Bob and Eric started bickering. Is that the right word?
Sure. Bantering
on the last
thoughts.
Stream, at the end of the last stream.
Yes.
Right. So you talked about, I think the question was the team should own something, and Bob was pushing back that no, the product owner should own that. So I want to revisit that since that was at the end and we shut it down relatively quickly.
Yeah, the start of that was from talking about the demos and getting the feedback and how product should really spearhead the getting the feedback. And that was where my initial pushback was, where I don't think product should spearhead it. I think the team should spearhead it. And then that got me thinking further, because one of the things that we love to do here at Translook is we like to try to get our teams as close to the problem as possible. Mm-hmm. So if we want to do that, well, how far does that go? How much of the traditional product work should a team do?
Right.
And so Bob and I started going back and forth over email, talking about, well, how much should they do? What is appropriate? And so just trying to think that through and challenge some of the thoughts, the traditional thoughts that leave that to the product owners and let the team develop software. Mm-hmm. And my thought is, well, where does developing software actually begin? Is it somewhere after the product owner has done something, or is it previous to that?
Right, I got you. Okay, I can buy that. So ways that I've used to try and visualize this, because it just helps me and my brain, is everybody has a word cloud of responsibilities. Yep. For those of us that are old enough to remember word clouds on blogs when that was a thing. So everyone has the same set of words in their word cloud. What that means is everybody has some responsibility to do all of that, or not to do all of it, but to be involved and have awareness of what's going on.
Sure.
But different roles, those words in that word cloud are going to be bigger for one role and smaller for another. So that's the visual I try to use with my team for software engineer 1, 2, 3, scrum master, product owner, all of those things, was we all have the same word cloud. We're all doing the same thing, but this is such a big beast that we need folks to focus in specific areas. It doesn't mean you're just like, oh, that's Eric's problem, I'm out, good luck. No, you need to be engaged, but somebody should be leading the charge that has the largest version of that word that's on their word cloud. So that's the analogy that I've used with teams, because, and kind of to Eric's point, is not letting people off the hook of, oh, that's not my problem, or oh, so-and-so is going to take care of it, but it's understanding there's a shared responsibility and there's somebody that's going to take the lead on it and keep me in the loop. So that's the...
Yeah, I think we have a pretty good idea of that when we talk about some of the engineering disciplines.
Right.
Like quality assurance is always something that we have to coach teams on of, hey, we do have QA, but everybody owns it.
Right.
So thinking about that in the product owner space, like you talk about a business case, for example, should the team get involved with that? Should that be on the team's backlog? Is it something that the product owner goes off and does by themselves, or should we bring a team into that and have that shared responsibility?
Gotcha. Well, I would love to hear what people out there have to say. So that's one thing. Someone asked me on Slack this morning, why Twitch? And from my perspective, the one thing that Twitch excels at is a community. And that's been my ultimate goal with this Twitch channel and with this Twitch streams, is that hopefully more or as many answers come from your fellow viewers as come from the people in front of the camera. Yes, we're going to be up here, and my ultimate goal is I'm just like that game show host, right? That just kind of like manages folks along a path and gets everybody the answers that they need, and every once in a while has something funny to say, or maybe actually adds a little bit of value. So that's my ultimate goal, and we're going to get there. But that's what we're trying to do. So we have questions from Machine Water Baby. That's a fantastic name.
That's great. I wish I had that name.
Okay. So yes, we are in the hands-on Agile Slack community. So we are there. So I'll go back to the top question. Have you worked with teams who use analytics to measure their own performance, attempt to improve themselves, aka not just to identify problems, but to become great? I suspect it's rare to find teams that's motivated to improve for improvement's sake. At my org, we have a lot of high-performing Agile teams without a lot of obvious problems to unearth at retros. So I'm looking to expand what we do there. Yep, rich man's problems. Yes, that's what I call a first world problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about metrics, and I think Tuesday
I threw that topic out.
Yeah,
actually.
Tuesday we went into metrics pretty heavy, and it's a never-ending battle, and I think it's mostly due to people's historical baggage that they bring with them. Somebody in their employment career likely misused metrics. The thing that we always talk about is that your metrics should be indicators for how things are going, not a definitive answer of good or bad. That you need a collection of metrics that you look at, very similar to a cockpit in an airplane, where you look at those, and there's not one. Okay, maybe altitude is one that if that's wrong, things are bad. But you need to know and pay attention to a lot of things, and use those as indicators of when to push in and start asking questions, versus just saying, okay, this number is supposed to be 12, but it's 11, so you guys are screwed up, and you have to fix that. So that's there. Regarding high-performing teams, yeah, I've had the joy of building some teams that were pretty high-performing, and one of the things that became a challenge was introducing these metrics. So I had a Scrum Master that collected probably a dozen metrics on every team, and our team had gotten to the point where they had improved about as much as they could, about as much as they thought they could. And we actually had one team that was pretty proud of themselves, but they actually, when you looked at the numbers, they were doing worse than the other teams. Air quotes was important, because according to those 12 numbers, things were going down. Now maybe it's appropriate that they went down, and maybe that's important to understand why, So I asked Richard to show every team a quarter's worth of their metrics, and it went terrible. Like, it was a total, complete train wreck. And it was that way because people's historical baggage with, oh, so now you care about velocity. Oh, velocity per employee. Oh, all these things. Well, okay, if that's what matters to you, then we're just going to start doing this, right? People always talk about you are what you measure, all those things. So it was what we didn't do a good enough job of with that situation was getting out in front of it and telling people this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and don't freak out, right? That's what we should have done. We should have got in front of the freak out bus and hopefully prevent that from happening. So that's something that that I wish we had done better with, and it took us probably 6 months to get teams over that. And what that was just us as leaders proving to them that we aren't going to misuse these numbers.
Right.
They are indicators. They aren't, this isn't how we're going to pay your bonuses or how we're going to give you raises or how you're going to get promoted, right? We are going to use these as that. This is simply an indicator for you guys. And it took 6 months of continual work on our end to get people over that historical baggage that they have and get comfortable with that. So that was, but that was just us extending trust and showing them, hey, listen, we aren't using it to do the things that have been done to you in the past.
Right.
So again, and even though they've been working for us for 2 years at that time, right? People trusted me at that point, but still, metrics are one of those things where hair on the back of people's necks starts to stand up. So that's the thing that we're wrestling with, or that we wrestled with.
Yeah, so when we talked Tuesday, I mentioned that I've been very slow to adopt metrics here for that reason, for the historical background.
So hold on, so for everybody, Eric, what do you do here?
I am the Agile Services Manager at Transloop. So I manage our Scrum Masters in our Agile process.
Okay, all right.
Our Agile program.
So you lead all of Agile here at Transloop?
Yes.
Right, okay, cool.
So been very, very slow to really adopt a set of metrics. But one of the things I did with the teams early on was when they start talking about changes they want to do, I always ask them, well, how are you going to measure that? How do you know? Like, how do you know that this is going to be effective? And try to get them thinking a little bit about, okay, well, how will we know? We don't just want to do something randomly. And so we had some metrics over time that started to stick, like cycle time and lead time. We were starting to get there and trying to really get the team to own it. Mm-hmm. Now, I failed as a Scrum Master because I didn't reinforce it. I had too many teams at the time and whatever.
That was under the bridge.
Yeah, that was my fault.
We make mistakes, right? That's how we learn.
But one of the things that I've found, I don't know if you've read this paper, but Jeff Sutherland and Scott Downey out of MySpace did a white paper on hyper-productive Scrum teams. Mm-hmm. And they have 10 metrics that are really outside of your traditional velocity and things like that I have found absolutely fascinating.
Right.
And I've had a couple teams look at it and like, man, we really want to try this. So if that's something, Machine Water Baby, did I get that right?
Yeah.
Yes. That might be something to look at. It's something about hyperproductive teams. Jeff Sutherland, and I don't remember the other guy's name. I think it was Scott Downey, but I could be mistaken. But it's a fascinating paper. He gets into the things like work capacity, mm-hmm. where they actually use story points on a daily basis. Like how many points of effort did you put towards that story yesterday? Which really helps teams start to understand what is a point and start to kind of normalize it for them. And then they can see, well, we thought this was a 3, but we put 5 points worth of effort. Mm-hmm. So in the retro, you start having some interesting discussions. And there's a lot of different things you could do off of that. Obviously, the team has to be bought in. Right. If the team isn't bought in, it's not going to work. But that's an interesting angle to take, and I would encourage you to check that out.
So Jeff Sutherland,
and I think it was Scott Downey.
Okay. Well, we'll try and find it and tweet it out, something like that. Oh, there you go. He found it. It's in the chat. Thank you, sir. Yeah, you were right. You nailed it. Scott Downey. Man, this guy. Gosh.
He also created RoboScrum, if you've ever heard of that.
Maybe I should have hired Eric so long ago.
Tried to tell you.
Sad face. Someday. Okay, so we'll take a little break here. If you are new, please hit the follow button at the top. That'll let us know. That will actually let you know when these streams go live. It's also a part of the indicator, as you see above our very handsome heads. My goal is to get to 100 new followers. So that's my target. I'm using that as a personal metric, right? So to Eric's point of how do you know it worked? So I'm tracking followers to know, hey, there's at least 100 people that said, I think this kind of makes sense, and I would tune in again. So that's an indicator for me that, hey, I should keep doing this and keep scheduling things and driving to see Eric and then going to meet Bob and then trying to come up with things to talk about on a Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. And all that stuff. The Tuesday is going to be interesting because my kids are off school on Tuesday. So that'll be interesting.
Wow. What I learned from Agile, I learned in 5th grade.
Yeah.
That could be a topic. Maybe bring your kids in.
Well, what's interesting is that my wife is a part-time teacher at the kids' school, and she's working on bringing Agile into their classroom, and she's planning to have scrum boards for all the projects that they're doing. And these are elementary kids, right? So these are, she comes in and teaches technology and is helping them with Scratch, and they have projects where they're trying to build something. So the theory is that every room, every class has their own scrum board, and work is either to do, in progress, or done. And she's going to teach the kids how to work through that and manage those projects like that.
Your honeydew list is about to become a scrum board.
Yeah, it's bad news, that honeydew list. Let's not bring that up. Yeah. Okay, cool. So thank you, Machine Water Baby, for that. Any other questions that folks have out there, please put them in the chat, and we will answer them as quickly as possible. So one thing that always comes up, and Eric introduced me to this new Slack. It's not a channel, but it's not a server. Is it just a Slack group? Okay, we'll go with the Slack group. Maybe Chad can inform me more effectively on what to call a Slack group server thing. And just the number of questions around Agile at scale and safe and everything that goes along with that. So you, here at Transloc, you're starting to wrestle with scale. Correct. So when you started, there were how many teams?
So we've gone through fluctuations. We had 3 teams when I started. We went down to 2, went back to 3, got up to 5. We currently have 4.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Okay. So with that, how have you had to adjust your process? Or have you not? Have you, in that 3 to 5 team realm, what you have works? Have you brought anything new in as teams of, or now that you have multiple Scrum Masters that are in that, what have you changed?
So we haven't had to change a whole lot. The biggest thing when we had the 4 teams, including 5 if you include our DevOps, which they're a team. I love you, DevOps. Don't go anywhere. We call them Build Ops. Please don't go anywhere. The thing that we had to do was manage the dependencies across the teams. So making sure that the teams were talking, that we knew what was coming up in each other's backlog. So that was when actually I went and visited you guys at the Dude to see what was going on over there. And we modified a little bit of what you guys were doing with your planning. But what we found right now is that the teams, because we've talked about collaboration, we've emphasized that the teams are working really well together, and we haven't had to change it. Now, we're having some changes in terms of business verticals that is going to be a challenge that we're going to have to face, like you guys did with the different ones at the Dude. So it'll be interesting to see what we're going to have to do as we go forward with these different teams.
Yeah, and to me, that's the message that I want people to hear, is that just because you're growing doesn't mean you have to radically change your process.
Right.
Run with the process you have and see what part, if any of it, breaks.
Yep.
Maybe none of it breaks, or maybe a little bit breaks. Then you don't have to swing in with the whole, you don't need all of safe.
Right.
the likelihood that you need to go from whatever you have to 100% safe is very low. Very low. So make just the tweaks that are necessary for you to fix the cracks that have developed with the scaling problems you have right now. That was one of the things that Richard, the Scrum Master that I worked with, was very good at, was making sure we didn't change things just to change stuff. Right? Because I was always pretending I had this crystal ball and I knew what problems were going to be like in 6 months when we had 7 teams instead of 4. And I was like, Richard, we got to figure this out. And he would be like, no, we don't. We don't have that problem right now. So just zip your lip.
That sounds like what I have to tell developers sometimes.
Yeah.
Don't fix the problem that you don't have.
Yeah.
Fix the problem that you have right now.
It's tough because it's done with the best intentions. Right?
Sure.
Like nobody's malicious. Nobody wants to add more process. Nobody wants to make stuff harder, but they also don't want to be painted into a corner, right? You think about writing some code and that thing you should have done 6 months ago that you didn't do now means you have triple the work. Right, so that's where that mindset comes from, and it's all well-intentioned, but oftentimes it's mistimed, and that's really where the problems come in. So, looks like we have another question. Do all of your teams follow the same process, or is there freedom within the team to choose how they work? Ooh, I got a good answer for this one, but I'm gonna let you go first. Or do you want me to go first?
Our teams have freedom to choose. We do have general guidelines that, like, here's what we expect out of an Agile group at our company, but how they work on a day-to-day basis, pretty much up to them.
Right. What are some of the guidelines you have?
Collaboration, absolute must. Everything, like, we highly emphasize pair programming. 80-20, get 80% of the value out there. Don't try to finish stuff. Stopping even over finishing is one of our values. Right. Understanding the problem even over solving the problem. Like, we have these, do I have them? I don't have them around here. We have a set of guidelines that we believe feed into it.
Is that like your definition of done? Or is it something different?
No, it's something different. It's more some philosophies that guide how we do software development. We don't want to ever finish anything, because if we finish something, we probably did too much. Because if 80% of the value comes from 20% of the work, if that Pareto principle is true, then we want to focus on that 80%, because that other 20% probably isn't worth it.
That's a fantastic clip. I'm going to make a Twitch clip of that. That's awesome.
Twitch clip.
Oh, no. So I'm going to give you my answer with, it'll be a little bit long-winded, but I think wow. I think the story will add some color and some flavor to it.
Story time.
Yep. Put your feet up, go get a coffee, whatever your drink of choice is, go get it. At the Dude, Dude Solutions, I realize not everybody lives in this area where people know what I'm talking about when they say the Dude. So I was hired into Dude Solutions probably 4 years ago to bring development onshore from offshore, and we grew from 0 to about 70 in the 2.5 years that I was there, and we acquired 3 or 4 other companies that all ended up rolling up under me. And because we started from scratch, we were like super agile, not like super good, but we had the opportunity to do Agile and Scrum the way it was intended, because we had no baggage of how it used to be, or it was always done this way. So we got to, just like building a new product from scratch, you have that opportunity to get the architecture right. We were able to architect our process without any historical baggage. So we had what we thought was a very good Agile process in place. And it was working really well for us. Then we started acquiring companies, and we were really proud of our Agile. So that first company, I went in and basically said, you're doing Agile and this is how you do it because it works for us, and get on board, and if you don't like it, get out. Right? And that backfired. Again, it backfired terribly. And working through that and understanding that took me some time to understand, like, well, why can't they do this? And we had a lot of long talks and discussions, and in reality, the thing that mattered to us, and we actually developed a contract very similar to an API. An API has a contract of it expects these inputs, gives you these outputs. So the outputs that were required from all of our teams were that they had to stand up and show their work every 2 weeks. That doesn't mean they have to operate in a 2-week sprint. That doesn't mean they have to operate in Scrum. Just every 2 weeks, stand up and show what you've done in the previous 2 weeks. However you want to operate under the covers or behind the curtains, that's up to you. It doesn't matter. You have to, once a month, forecast out your next 12 weeks worth of work. For us, we call that a PSI plan. So that was 6 sprints for us because we did 2-week sprints. So every month, update your next quarter's worth of work and tell us what you think you're going to do. Also, in that same time frame, update your forecast for what you're going to do for the next 12 months in a quarterly chunks, right? We didn't want people to plan out tasks or anything like that. But in these chunks, here's what we expect. So that was the contract that we expected from every team. How they operated behind the scenes was up to them. But those were the information radiators that every team produced, so that way the business could understand what was going on, when we expected it to happen, what was going wrong, and everything that needed to surround launching a product besides just building it. That became the cadence that we put in place and the processes and the outcomes that we expected. So I didn't come in with this Scrum hammer and say you're doing Scrum, which is what I did with the first team, and that backfired. And team 3, team 4, team 5 that we acquired, it just got more smooth because we all of a sudden weren't that big bad acquiring company that's like changing their processes of how they do things. No, you keep rolling the way you're rolling. And the thing that I heard from so many of those teams is, why are you changing who we are? You bought us for a reason.
Right.
Like, you think we're good, so let us keep doing what we're doing. So that was the change that we made, was, okay, you keep doing what you're doing. The only thing we ask is that you publish these things. So this is what I've done in the past 2 weeks. This is what I expect to do in the next quarter in relative detail. Then this is what I expect to do in the next year at a quarterly level. So that's the contract that we came up with. And even teams within our own 4 walls started to experiment a little bit more and do things like that. Once it was weird, they felt like the shackles were off. Like, oh, well,
right.
If they can do that, we can do that. So that was one of those things that changed. So that was good.
I like that. This idea of the contract, I think I'm going to take that.
It works, man.
We were just actually, one of my Scrum Masters and I were just talking about his team, and they wanted to experiment going to Kanban.
Yeah.
And we were talking about the reasons, and I cringed a little bit. But this idea of the contract, I think, man, that's a great idea. I learned something today. I'm going to take that.
So to Water Baby's question, yeah, if they want to do Scrum and another team wants to do Kanban, yeah, go ahead. It doesn't matter. Again, just stand up in front of everybody and say, hey, this is what I built in the last 2 weeks. The mechanisms that you used to get there, that's up to you.
Right.
We expect teams to continually improve and to look at how they can get better and to experiment. So that was part of the culture of who we are. It sounds like the culture of what you're building here. So when you have that, people want to try new things, and after they get comfortable and confident because they've been running well, they start to feel a little congested. And it's like, just let me try something new. So now you have to let that happen. And that contract was the thing that we did, that we put in place, that let people chart their own path.
Right.
But also keep telling home base, hey, this is what's going on.
Right. It's the guardrails. We talk a lot about, self-organizing doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want to.
Right.
But there's often guardrails that we need to put in place. So, yeah, I love that. I'm seriously, we're going to talk about that at our next. If any of my people are watching, we're talking about that.
Ooh, yeah. There we go. Okay. So another question: what personnel do your teams consist of? Product owner, devs, etc. I'll let you go.
Yeah, so we have I was just talking with our engineering director yesterday. He actually has a formula, I guess, for how he constructs teams. So we have usually four software engineers, 2 QA, 1 UX, a PM or a PO, and a Scrum Master. So that's our typical, pretty much our typical build out here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I've fluctuated, and at Dude Solutions, we had a similar thing, and the reason directors and VPs, like this guy you mentioned and myself, have to come up with these ratios and formulas is because somebody upstream is asking, how much money do you need?
Yep.
So that's what happens is, so like at Dude Solutions, we ended up with $100 million coming in. So that was the investment that we got. And people started saying, okay, Josh, how many teams do you need? What does each one of those teams cost? What are the people you need? What are the roles? All those things. So that's why those annoying questions come up. But we ended up with a 5-to-2 ratio. So we had 5 developers, 2 quality. So everybody was an engineer. So we had software engineer, quality engineer. There was a product owner that was associated with every team. So it was a 1-to-1 ratio, product owner and the team. And Scrum Masters were, depending on experience, 1-to-1 with a team or a max of 1-to-3.
Right.
So our more senior folks that were working with more senior teams, or if you follow the Shuha Re model with more Re teams, they could start to fan out and address more and more teams and support them because the teams, again, had gotten pretty confident in the way they rolled and started to think like Scrum Masters. To me, that was always the ultimate goal for a Scrum Master, was put yourself out of a job. Not that you put yourself out of a job, but be able to know that you've infused your enthusiasm, your excitement, your passion for the process into that team.
That's an interesting discussion we could have, because
it's good.
With the Patriots, right? They're at Re, would you say? Well, maybe not this season.
Yeah.
Still need a coach.
I'm not suggesting the coach goes away.
I know, it's just this whole work myself out of the job.
That's why I do air quotes. I do air quotes. I'm not suggesting the job goes away, but you then, so to me, if you have a Re team, so if you have a team, so Shuha Re, that's 3 levels of experience and skill within anything. So Re is the highest level. So imagine you have a team that's been together for 5 years. They're absolute freaking rock stars, and they run the process really well. Do you need to spend all of your time with them?
No.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
So there you go. So
I do agree, yes.
Yeah.
It's just that whole...
Well, and that's why I try and do the air quotes, because I'm not suggesting that that role is no longer needed.
Right.
It's just the requirement for your attention and energy with that group is lessened, and it's likely more important that you focus it somewhere else because they're doing pretty good.
Sure.
Now, the danger with that is the same danger that you have with employees. People end up spending 80% of their time on the bottom 20% of their employees, when in reality, if they spent 80% on their top 20%, that would accelerate the team even more. Right. So that's that dangerous balance. Cool.
You know, Josh, going back to that question, I noticed a difference between our teams.
Yeah.
And I know it's discussions that we've had before. We have UX embedded on our teams. Mm-hmm. So each one of our teams will have a UX engineer. You guys did it a little bit differently, though.
So the reason we did it differently is because UX reported to the product organization, and the product organization was a sibling org. So in jobs after that, after I left the Dude, where everything reported to me, they would have been all on the same team. Okay. And I don't think a 1-to-1 has worked for me in the past. Sounds like you have a 1-to-1 UX to team. Yep. I've had reasonable luck with 1-to-2 ratio. But the difference between how it worked at Dude Solutions and the way that I run it is that they are a member of the team. It's almost like they're part-time. So they don't pick up a lot of work. They pick up half their work, and they juggle from team to team. So what I have done after I left Dude Solutions is I didn't hire quality engineers. Everybody was responsible for quality. So I took that huge leap of we all own quality. Now we had the opportunity again to build a product from scratch and build quality in from scratch. Right. So we didn't have that, we have to go spend all this time to re-instrument code, to run tests and things like that. So we had that in support of us, and that enabled that to happen. I am not saying that's the right answer for everybody. I think if you are building something from scratch, you could do that. I'm not saying I don't know if I'd do it again. I think I might, but you have to really hire the right people. Like, you have to nail all of your hires, because it's just hard.
Yeah. and that might get to part of that question too about the team makeup. It's just making sure that the skills are represented for what you need to do. So if you have a lot of data that you're dealing with, you might need a data engineer, or you might need a data scientist, or team makeup definitely depends on the product that you're working on.
All right, so we have a follow-up question. How involved are the software engineers in deciding the roadmap? You were just speaking of the long and short-term one. Is there a bigger product vision that unites all the teams in some way?
Wow, that's a great question. How involved, I think, depends on how much the product owner engages the squad. For our case, I think they're very involved, because the discussions that we have, the problems that we're looking at, our PMs are fantastic about asking the squad, hey, what do you guys think? Is this the right order? Do we need to change the order? At our sprint reviews with our stakeholders, we look at the roadmap, we look at the things coming up, and the squad, the PM, and the stakeholders have conversations. Mm-hmm. So we've had things that said, oh, you know what, we want to move this here and move this here and move it all around. So I would say they have very, very high input into it based on some of the ceremonies that we do.
Right. Yeah, so it's similar so everyone is involved in what I call the PSI forecast. So for the next quarter, every team, we call them squads also, every squad plans out their next 6 sprints. This is what we expect to build. Every member of the team is involved with that. The 1 year look ahead, by quarter, we involve a much smaller percentage of the team. Basically, one person from each team is brought into that discussion to be the representative of sanity, right? Of okay, yeah, that's reasonable. No, it's not, and planning and sizing and things like that. But the reason that we don't involve more people in that 1 year look ahead is because it's so dynamic. And what we saw was the amount of churn that we had at the 6+ month window was so high that it was important for us to talk about those things and understand the things that we needed to be worried about, but we didn't need to distract 50 people with it. We were comfortable distracting 7 or 8 with it.
Right.
And that was okay, because there was a lot of churn behind the scenes on what we were, because we were acquiring companies. We might acquire, oh no, we're not going to acquire those, so now we have to build it. Oh, surprise, we're acquiring this company. All these things, just a lot of stuff changed because we were in such a hyper growth model with that $100 million funding that it just didn't necessitate everybody being a part of it, because that churn was there. And the churn was for all the right reasons. It just, we had to accept the way it was and get the right amount of distraction and the right amount of involvement from team members.
I think the key word that I'd want to point out that you said, and I know you guys emphasize this a lot, is forecast.
Yeah.
It's a forecast, it's not a commitment. And to anybody who's hearing this who may be thinking, oh my gosh, you're doing all this upfront planning, you're doing this long, isn't that, that sounds like waterfall. Mm-hmm. There are business needs for why you do need to forecast. But what I love about what you've talked about and what I've seen is teaching and educating the business around a forecast and understanding that, hey, one of our 4 agile values, we're going to respond to change over following a plan. So this forecast is and will change. So for any folks who are hearing that, hear the word forecast, and just like your weather forecast, it's going to change.
So I knew, actually, one of my biggest personal victories at Dude Solutions was when I heard our CEO tell the board of directors that providing a annual budget that was 100% correct for the next 12 months was a fallacy, and that he just wanted to update the budget every month as things went along with an updated forecast of what things looked like, because there was so much that changed in the business. So that was when I had that little victory, like 2.5 years in, and yes, they finally got it. It was one of those things where getting people to stop and look and listen to the things that have always been there, but do it with a slightly different lens on, really helped us as an org of, okay, so all this pain and suffering I'm going through to try and get this like pixel perfect budget for a $100 million company is kind of insane.
And unrealistic.
Yeah, right. So that was, but it took a while to get people there, but we did get there, and that started with, in our first PSI plan, which is where we were first going to forecast out the next 6 sprints, developers were freaking out because they felt like, oh my God, I'm going to tell you what I think we're going to do 12 weeks from now, and you're going to hold me to it. So what we ended up doing, and I'm pretty sure it still hangs on the wall up there.
I saw it Monday.
Is it still there?
Yeah.
There's a giant sticky that's on the wall that says, this is a forecast, this is not a blood oath, this is not a blah, blah, blah. Our agile coach signed it, I signed it, and my peer on the product side signed it. And that at least got people over the hump that, okay, they're willing to put this out there. And then again, it was just, we had to actually prove that we meant it with our actions. It wasn't enough that we put words on a piece of paper and stuck it on a wall. It got to the point where we just proved it because things changed and we said, okay, cool, we got it. But we trusted our teams trusted us, and it worked pretty darn well.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Eisenhower quote, which I always mess up.
Oh, good. I would never know if you messed it up. So maybe Chat will. Chat will probably know.
The act of planning is priceless, but plans are useless, or something like that.
Right. And so that's interesting because at my last company, we were floating between Kanban and Scrum, and we were debating what was right. And in our backlog refinement sessions, we were still doing the planning poker and putting points on things. And I raised the question, should we still point things? Because in the end, it doesn't really matter what the point number is. And the first thing that happened is like all my developers that had worked with me before had to pick themselves up off the floor because they apparently had talked about that at lunch like a week before, and they started scratching their heads like, these points.
Who is this guy?
It doesn't make any sense. And one of the more senior guys that have worked with me for a bit longer was like, don't ever bring that up to Josh. Just don't do it. He'll flip out. So when I brought it up, they all started laughing and they all couldn't believe I said it. But in the end, after a discussion with them, we all came to the point that, okay, the numbers on the stories don't really matter. The most important thing is that those numbers drove the conversation that needed to happen.
Exactly.
So without me having to decide if I'm going to say this is a 3 or an 8, I might not put in the mental cycles to really think through what the problem is or isn't and how I would solve it. So Absolutely. The team understood the value of that exercise, and in the end, the story point numbers didn't matter, but the team had recognized over enough time that those discussions were priceless, and that's what led us to becoming a truly highly effective team, was those discussions in the refinement sessions.
So there's a build onto that I have, unless we have a question. Do we have another?
No, we're good.
Okay, good. So one of the things I often hear Scrum Masters talk about with their teams is, did we get the estimate right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes going back in retro and looking at the estimate, and what I've come to learn is what the estimate is, kind of what we just talked about, doesn't matter. It's what you do with the new information in the sprint.
Yeah.
So if you estimated something at a 5 and it turns into an 8, what are you doing at that point in time, in real time, to deal with that information? Are you saying, okay, we're going to storify that, put that in the backlog? Are you negotiating with your product owner? Are you looking at acceptance criteria? There's so many things that you can do with that.
Right.
The estimate doesn't matter. It's what you do with that information in real time as it comes in. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think most teams fail, is not dealing with that information correctly in real time. Not being able to get to done because they're not dealing with the new information that they learned, because you don't know everything in grooming.
Right.
You'll never know everything in grooming. It's always, what do you do with this information in real time?
Okay. I can buy that.
That was my soapbox for the day.
Soapboxes are great. All right, so we have about 10 more minutes. If you have a question, throw it out there in the chat on the right-hand side. While you're doing that, if you haven't already, please hit the follow button up above us. That's our indicator as to whether this is working well. Nice. It is kind of right above his head. Yeah, that's pretty sweet. Well done. It's like you've done this before. And you haven't.
I'm a natural. I think
well.
that means we need to do this again.
Maybe. We'll see. We'll see what kind of feedback we get. No, we'll do it again. So one of the things that I want to talk about is that real-time reaction. So what our teams did was they would refine stories, get it to a point where things were where they knew enough to size it. They knew enough to start working on it, but they still had what we called a story kickoff.
Yep.
So in the sprint, the team gets to a point where, okay, I'm going to go grab that and get started on it. They wouldn't just blindly go start on it. They would go through another level of refinement.
Yep.
Almost. They would grab that story, and whoever's going to work with them, they would talk a little bit further. And I think that's that real-time discovery that you're talking about of, okay, we really need to do this. And we got there because we got in a lot of trouble where people just grab stories and run with it. And then there would be a discovery relatively late in the sprint that, oh crap, there was this AC that should have been on there that wasn't. So we started to debug our process and figure out what wasn't working, and that story kickoff was the thing that helped us get that next level down that a lot of people do with tasking. So I'm just not a huge fan of tasking. Bob Galen is a huge fan of tasking, and I'm not sure we'll ever agree with that. So I want to get your view on, do your teams create tasks out from under stories, or do you just let them run with it? How does it roll?
Oh man, I don't know specifically where they're at now, as I'm a little bit more removed from that. But so we do kickoffs. We have that same concept. Some teams have experimented both ways. Some teams said, all right, we're not going to do tasks at planning. Mm-hmm. We'll do them at the kickoff. And then I've had another team say, you know what, we actually want to do a more extensive planning, and mm-hmm. Scrum says 4 hours for a two-week sprint, and they want to actually spend that time doing it. So I've seen it both ways. I've kind of left it up to the team and said, I think most teams have found that extra kickoff and then doing the tasks mm-hmm. gives them a little bit better understanding of the work that's really involved, and you have a little bit more accurate tasks.
Yeah, I'm just physically incapable of sitting in a meeting and being effective for 4 hours.
It's a long time.
So I try and segment things out as much as possible. So that's why I've always kicked tasking down the road and do it just in time. Do it when you need it, not now, because I don't want to sit in this meeting for another 2 hours. That was just and that's how we got to that PSI plan. Every month we got that down to about an hour and a half, because the teams had adopted that same mindset I have of we need to get in and get out, whereas Classic Safe says that's like a 2-day process for them.
Yeah. And
they do it once a quarter, and I just imagined hating life, thinking leading up to it in that meeting for 2 days that, holy shit, are we really going to do, like, we're really going to do this for the next 16 hours of our lives and come out sane? And I just couldn't do that. So I'm like, we have to find a different way to do this. We have to figure out how to do this in 2 hours and be done. And over the years that I was there, people and squads got really good and were able to knock it out in about an hour and a half. The good ones, the ones that have been running, the newer ones, it took them longer. But they eventually got to where they could just crush it and everything was fine.
Well, it seems like a lot of people do the tasking because that's how they were taught to do the burn down. Mm-hmm. Is your burn down is on the tasks, which I personally don't like anyway, because a task isn't delivering any value.
Right.
And you're almost getting a false sense of comfort from that burn down when, okay, so you've completed a bunch of tasks, but you haven't delivered anything.
Right, you haven't actually shipped something.
Yeah. So changing the burn down to stories would be required if you use that. And that's uncomfortable for a lot of people because you don't see that burn down very quickly when you're doing it at a story level. But I think that level of discomfort is very interesting, and I think it helped teams.
All right, so we have a very important question.
Oh, we do?
Yeah, we do. Eric, why did you try to catch a falling motorcycle? How long did it take to heal?
Wow, who asked that question? And how did you know about that?
I don't know, but that's a good question.
Why did I try to catch a falling
So for those of you that don't know, Eric's a motorcycle guy. Like,
yes.
he has acquired motorcycles at a very high price. He and I were talking at lunch one day. He's like, you know how much that motorcycle cost? And he told me, and I was like, holy crap, that's a lot of money. Now, it was a super nice motorcycle, but it better be. But yeah, so Eric, a month ago, you drove all the way across. You took two weeks, right?
2 weeks, yeah.
And he rode his motorcycle out to South Dakota.
Wyoming,
yeah. So
we hit South Dakota.
Yeah, that was his vacation. Hey, I'm going to take 2 weeks to ride a motorcycle for 2 weeks, and that made him happy. So
5,230 miles.
Wow.
Why did I catch a falling motorcycle? Well,
he said he found you on Twitter. So that's how.
Well, not very bright would be probably the best answer. I had one of my bikes I was putting in the garage, and I was putting it right up against the wall, and it's a little taller for me. So I had to lower it, and when I lowered it, the kickstand, I have to lean it to the right to put down, but I couldn't lean it to the right because I was all the way up against the wall. So I had this genius idea that, I'll just lean it up against the wall to the right and get off to the left, and not thinking about the inertia of my body getting off of the bike, and it fell over, and I tried to catch it. And
yeah,
the wrist is better now.
Okay. Cool. All right, well, folks, we are about 5 minutes. Unless there's any last-minute questions, we're going to shut this down. So a couple of requests. Number one, I've said it multiple times. Please hit that follow button if you can. Well done, Eric. Also share. We're trying to add value to the Agile community in a live setting. So Slack works. Slack is cool. I'm in many of the Slack channels. But I'm a fan of face-to-face communication and support in real time, and that's what we're trying to do. So the more people you can bring to this, the more effective it's going to be. So tell your folks, tell your friends, tell them whoever you think would get value out of this, share it with them. And we are here Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Eastern and Thursdays 3 p.m. Eastern. So we've had a lot of people ask around time zones in Slack, and when is it? I logged in and it was Central and you were done. So we have already adjusted dates and times based on feedback from our viewers, so that can and will happen as things go and grow. So I would love to do this every day, but until we have enough folks, I don't know that it makes sense, but maybe we'll get there where we're chatting every day and we are helping each other out. So, yeah, Rich, that's right, not 11 a.m. So we got that figured out. So good to have you here, Rich. I'm glad we got this sorted out and you're here on time. So that is it. I thank Eric for hosting and for being a guest host here, and thanks everyone for coming in and asking questions and engaging, and cyber stalking Eric on Twitter. That was the best part of the whole thing. All right. Thank you, everyone.